partnership of its kind for next 3 decades. And you all will be driving that partnership in the future. You'll be taking the reins soon enough. Take the opportunity, get to know these leaders, get to learn from them, ask as many questions, build a relationship with them. They will be very, very handy when you step out of the campus. So with that, thank you. And again, good job.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm honored to call upon the Honorable Consul General of India from San Francisco, Dr. Shrikar Reddy, who's been hugely supportive of our initiatives and programming since he joined us just last year. So please give a very warm welcome to our Consul General.
Ambassador Sri Priya Ranganathan, Anurag Mairal, Professor at Stanford, Maya Center of Biodesign, speakers, faculty members, and my dear students, a very good morning. Namaskar. I'm delighted to be back at Stanford for the second time in 3 days. So I had the privilege of participating in the inaugural session of the India Dialogue led by the Stanford faculty 2 days back. And now I'm back for the student-led conference. In fact, when the Stanford India Policy and Economic Club members met me in November, so they floated this idea of organizing this conference. I immediately supported their idea. And I'm very happy that with their very hard work and also support and guidance from Professor Anurag, so it has become a reality. And today we are seeing a good program with distinguished speakers in various fields of economy, politics, healthcare, and technology and other areas, media and other areas. So I'm very happy. I would like to congratulate the SIPEC team led by Devansh and Arman. So very good, congratulations. And also I would like to thank generous supporters like Jadeja Motwani Foundation for the generous support for organizing this event. So all of you are aware that India got this dubious distinction last year in April of becoming the largest populated country in the world. But I think our large and youthful population is an asset for the country, because the average age of Indian population is 28 years old. Unlike Europe, the average age is 44 years. In US, it is 38, and China, 39 years. So the youth and aspirational population is driving the India's growth. So if you see just the last quarter GDP growth figures were out yesterday. So Indian GDP grew around 8.4%, and for this financial year, we are expecting a growth rate of 7.6%. So this is the third consecutive year where India is growing more than 7%, and it is also projected to grow over 7% in the next 3 years. So Indian economy is going to become the third largest and reach 5 trillion in the next 3 years, and also we're expecting to become a 7 trillion economy by 2030. And as you're aware, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave a call to all Indians living in India and abroad, especially the youth of the country, including all of you here, to make India a developed country by 2047. So we are expecting India to be a 35 trillion economy by 2047. And we are also expecting India to overtake the US economy in 2060. Means you'll be seeing India as a big developed country, and each one of you are going to become partners in this India's economic growth. So I'm very happy that recently I visited some university in Southern California, Los Angeles, and also Arizona State University. I had the opportunity to interact with the students. I'm very happy to see that many students, maybe 30–40% of them, so they told me that they only come here to the US to study, and they would like to go back and become entrepreneurs and create jobs and also become part of the India's growth story. Unlike in the earlier times, during our times, people used to migrate to US just to settle down here, but this is a welcome change. I think each one of you, especially because you are the very fortunate ones to get admission in colleges at the Stanford University. I think after gaining knowledge, I think most of you will prosper not only here but also go back to India and also become part of this overall Indian development. And as you know, India, we are in the midst of a digital revolution. So you must have heard about the India Stack, which is based on three aspects. One is the digital identity, Aadhaar card. The second is the United Payment Interface, which is UPI, and the Safe Data Exchange Mechanism. So this, with this UPI payment mechanism, already it is become an important part of the India's development story. Like this has made inclusive growth in India, because all the people who were outside the formal sector, like street vendors, now because of this, they are becoming part of the formal financial system. It has made government direct benefit transfers directly into the accounts of all the beneficiaries. And also it is also because more and more people are using digital payments, it has also increased the revenues of the government. So this thing is very revolutionary. Like we have close to 380 million users, and in the just last month, in the month of January alone, 12.2 billion transactions were done using this very cheap program. And also this UPI payment thing has been now, many countries have adopted. Like recently, just a couple of months, in last 2 months, we had Mauritius, Sri Lanka, Singapore, UAE, and also France adopting this thing. We're also expecting the remittances from Indian diaspora living in these countries, the transaction cost will come down, because now the transaction cost is around 6 to 8%. But now we are expecting the transaction cost, especially when these countries, wherever this UPI thing is adopted, it will bring down 2%, because the remittances for Indian diaspora, including the 5 million strong diaspora in the US, last year we have received 125 billion US dollars. So next year we are expecting 135. But if the people are losing money in the transaction due to transaction costs, it is not good for the people sending, and also back home, the Indian economy also it will help. So I think these are the things. India is progressing very well, and I think each one of you will be part of this India growth story. I think my only suggestion to all of you is dream big, work hard, and ensure that whatever you think, you'll achieve your goal. So this thing. Just I'll just mention one quotation from Aristotle. He once said, "Excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution." So I think I have no doubt that each one of you will put hard work and reach whatever goals or destination you have set for yourselves. And I conclude once again by appreciating all members of this SIPEC for organizing the Students India Dialogue Conference. And just before concluding, I would like to introduce Ambassador Sri Ranganathan. She began her career in the Indian Foreign Service in the year 1994. She served in various countries like Turkey, Myanmar, and also Hong Kong. And immediately prior to joining the Indian Embassy in Washington, year and a half back as the Deputy Chief of Mission, she was Ambassador of India in South Korea for 4 years. And she took over as the acting ambassador since 1st of February. And in Delhi also, she worked in very important divisions like the Bangladesh-Myanmar division. She headed that division. And also she served for 4 years in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in the Trade Policy division. She speaks Tamil, Hindi, English, and also Turkish. And ma'am, without further ado, I would like to invite you to address the gathering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shrikar. Good morning to all of you. It's truly such a pleasure to be in this amazing group today. And I'm very grateful to the faculty and to the students of Stanford for inviting us and for making it possible for us to share a little bit of what are our perspectives and our impressions of the India-US partnership, and what we hope and believe that you as Indian students in one of the most iconic and one of the most respected institutes of higher education across the world will be able to contribute. For me, it's truly an extraordinary privilege to be on this campus today. For many of us in India, Stanford is as a name stands for excellence, stands for something which is really, out of reach to most students who are looking for higher educational opportunities. And I think all of you must congratulate yourself for your courage of conviction and for your own achievements in even having made it to where you are right now, to be part of this educational journey here in Stanford. So I think it is, for me, a matter of great pride that so many Indians are part of this educational journey here in Stanford. When I was thinking about what I should say to you and what would be of interest to you in the context of the dialogue that you have here today, I thought that I would speak first about the connections between India and the US, the educational connections between India and the US, and what we as Government of India and as the Embassy of India hope that the Indian student community in the US will be able to contribute as well. The threads that connect India and the US are strong, they run very deep, and they have been of very long standing. For more than 7 decades, in fact, I would say right from the time that India became an independent nation 75 years ago, knowledge partnerships and people-to-people ties have really formed the bedrock of this relationship. And in fact, it is the early waves of Indians who moved to the US to study and to make their careers, the engineers and the doctors. That was back in the 1950s and the 1960s, who created the openings of awareness of what India is and what India stands for amongst the people of the USA. If I look at over the past 20 to 25 years, you can also see in very clear, tangible, numerical terms, the manner in which the student partnership has also driven this relationship. Back in the year 2000, I was looking at the data before I came here. We had about 50,000 Indian students in the US, across all institutions in the US. Today, we are at 337,000. And I think that in itself speaks for what has changed and what has been transformative in this partnership. Of that, I was just asking Dr. Anurag, and he says that there are a few hundred here in Stanford, and that itself is remarkable. When I look at the broader relationship, the India-US strategic partnership, I think we have now reached a stage where we can say that the partnership has come into its own. We have achieved a lot over the past, like I said, 70 years. But what we have achieved over the past 20 years has been at a different level altogether. And I would say that now we are at a stage where we can be as ambitious as we choose to be. We can decide to set our goals, set our sights on targets that were unimaginable a few years ago. And we can say we not only can be ambitious, but we can also be confident that we can make these things work. We can bring to implementation ideas that would have seemed outlandish even 20 years ago. And I'll just touch on a couple of these before I move on to talk about the human connections between us. One example I want to give you is in the area of space. And many of you would have seen, and I know that many of you would have applauded the success of ISRO's Chandrayaan mission in bringing human beings to the, or human insight into the southern pole of the moon. What is perhaps less well known is the ISRO-NASA collaboration on the NISAR project. And that is such an exciting project in that there is a complex payload, a payload which has been partially designed and developed in India, brought to the US, partially designed and developed in the US. The payload has been put together, taken back to India for final testing and integration by Indian and US scientists. And that will be launched by the middle of this year on an Indian satellite and into outer space. And the data that will emerge from that satellite will be of value and will be made available to the scientific community across the world free of cost. So I think that's a great example of ideas that have been fleshed out, scientists who have come together, and for us to be able to deliver something which is of value to the world. The second example I want to give you is in wider realm of critical and emerging technologies, because this is something that was launched about a year ago in the end of January, when India and the US agreed that we would come together in a more focused, systematic manner to explore possibilities for bilateral cooperation in various elements of high technology: artificial intelligence, robotics, defense and aerospace, biotechnology, bioinformatics, biomanufacturing, the entire area of semiconductors, quantum computing, high performance computing. So, all areas in which in both countries our scientists and policymakers are actively engaged, because we see these as being the frontiers of the future and what will allow us to gain the leadership role in the shape of the global economy in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And we have reached the stage where we have been able to say to each other that let's work together so that we are able to shape this world together, so that we are able to discover where are the areas of overlap, where are the areas of complementarity, so that together we are able to make a difference. And I think if we look back after about 10 years, we will find that there are at least 10 to 15 interesting, important and profound projects that India and the US have been able to work on and concretize, so that we are able to make this a fantastic platform of our collaboration. Now, coming back to the human connection, the people-to-people contacts between us, I mentioned that we have the advantage of having, at the moment, 330,000 Indian students in the US. And this is, to my mind, a very, very powerful bridge that connects the people of India and the people of the USA. Their success, your success across fields, whether it is in the field of technology, STEM, whether it is in the field of humanities, journalism, whatever would be the sector that you're interested in and that you wish to make your career in. By your sheer presence over here and by your capacity to pick up what is happening in this country, the innovation, the excitement, the energy, the capacity of academia and industry to work together. Whatever you can pick up over here, whatever you can share in your turn back in India in terms of what to shape what is happening in India. And at the same time, and I would take a cue from what my friend over here said, that what can we do to also inform the people over here about what is happening in India. And it's really so amazing the kind of changes that are taking place on the economic front, the technology front, the societal front, the changes that are happening in terms of empowerment of women, for example, the changes that are happening in terms of bringing to center stage people from remote parts of the country. These are all transformations that are happening every single day, and the world only gets a glimpse of it through the media, and often these are part of the story. So each of you, since you have this very direct connection with India through your families and your own growing up years, we believe that you will be able to contribute very tangibly to the partnership and the understanding between India and the US. So I would want to give to you a few thoughts of how you can serve as these living bridges between India and the US. The first bridge is that of knowledge. The very fact that you are at a university like Stanford, which is rightly known as an innovation hub and as an institute of excellence, which takes in the best and the brightest and brings out people who are thoughtful, who are forward-leaning, who are capable of making a mark on whichever area of activity you choose to touch. I would urge you to maintain your connections with India and bring some of these learnings also back to India, so that we are able to also benefit from the knowledge that you're picking up over here. The second is a bridge of collaboration. If you can join hands with both on campus and beyond, with your friends, with your peers in the US, professors in the US, and able to pursue excellence in partnership with them, I think that is an area of exploration that we feel would yield us tremendous dividends going forward. The third bridge is the bridge of culture. If you can, in your conversations, in your interactions, share the cultural perspectives, share your stories, break down the stereotypes, and spark off that interest in India, in knowing about India, in experiencing India, sharing the amazing progress that India has made in the past few years with your colleagues and friends and fellow students here on campus. I think that would be an amazing contribution that you would be able to make. And I would put it to you that if you were to take a poll amongst the students on campus and perhaps even the faculty on campus, how many people on this campus would know that right now in India, we have a woman president? We have a woman president who belongs to a tribal community. We have a woman president who belongs to a tribal community, who was a teacher in a school in a small place in Odisha until she came and she moved into the role that she in. She literally moved from a single room cottage to the majesty of Rashtrapati Bhavan. And that is the reason why India ticks. And that is the reason why there is so much of optimism and there is so much of confidence in India that the Indian democracy works. And this is why there is that buzz in India that we are going to have a better future and a better lifestyle ahead. How many people on this campus would know about the amazing transformation that has taken place in India's digital landscape? That just over the past 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, we have brought in more than 80% of the Indian people into the formal banking ecosystem. There are 99% of India's 1.4 billion people have their own unique digital ID. That the number of rural internet users in India is 340 million, and this is more than the number of internet users in urban India. I don't think people know of these realities and these changes that have taken place. How many people know that 40% of global digital payments take place in India? These are realities which are often overlooked because people don't connect the dots and figure out that these are the changes that are taking place. This is truly the new India, the India that we are experiencing. And I would put it to you that next year when you have this conference, you will find that these figures have changed, and you will be able to say it may not be 340 million, it may be 400 million. And I would not be surprised if that change has come about. So I would, again, returning to the bilateral space, we have the ambition, the confidence that we would be able to bring on the table a whole lot of new areas of collaboration. We are hoping that we will be co-developing and co-producing a lot of technology, defense equipment, space equipment. We are confident that our startups, your startups, the venture capitalists, the investors, they will all come together to create an absolutely new realm of exploration and activity. We believe that that we will work together to generate and to secure global supply chains. We will be able to back each other up, fill the gaps that we are perceiving in our respective capacities, and help each other to be able to be even stronger in our economies, even stronger in our capacity to make the most of what the world is offering, and also even stronger in our capacity to deliver to what the poorer segments in the world are looking forward to. So, friends, with this, I would like to conclude by wishing you the very best of luck in whatever you're choosing to study. You are at an amazing institution. You must make the most of the years that you have on campus. But I want you to remain connected with India, remain connected with your home culture and your home country, and help us in India to learn from what you're learning and make it a richer and stronger partnership. Thank you so much, and all the best for the dialogue.
All right. Thank you so much, Honorable Ambassador. Before we move forward, there's one other person that I really want to thank, and I'm going to have her. I'm going to shout her out. So I do want her to take a stand. Ms. Asha Jadeja Motwani. She's been hugely instrumental in helping SIPEC plan our events and for putting together this conference. So thank you so much for being here. And she'll be leading a lunch table topic discussion. So please make sure to stick around for that. With that, the opening ceremony is just about done. But before you guys hop off stage, we have a tradition here at SIPEC. Because we're trying to, really bolster the India narrative on campus, we like to tell people to put on their thinking hats. So if I could have you, the two of you come up to the stage. So I'd like to, so Devansh is going to present them with just a token of our gratitude and thank them from coming all this way for us. Thank you guys so much. Should they put it on? If they'd like. And then we'll get a photo. Thank you. Okay, so just give us a minute or two here, and then we'll get started with the main program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We're gonna have to add the third one. Okay, everyone, can you please stay seated because we're gonna start our next we're starting our next event here right now. Please. Just we'll give everyone a second to sit back down. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so just I want to make sure that we're running here on time. So I'll go ahead and bring up our first speaker. So our first speaker is Mr. Sai Deepak. Many of you already know him. There we go. So I'll give him a short introduction, but by the sounds of that, it doesn't look like he needs one. So Mr. J. Sai Deepak is an arguing counsel before the Supreme Court of India. He's litigated many high-profile cases, and he's a best-selling author of India history-focused books such as India That Is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, and Constitution. So give another warm welcome for Mr. J. Sai Deepak. All right. Can we hear us? Okay, perfect.
Am I audible?
Good.
Oh,
Okay,
Jai
perfect.
Shri Ram.
Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So, Mr. Deepak, you've written a lot about, in recent years, about India's history. You've commented a lot about of India's history, and in the last few years, there's been a lot more interest, both in India but around the world, about what India's history really is and how to talk about it. So, you've commented on the the sociocultural, sociopolitical sort of churn that's going on in Indian society right now. So, especially for those of us who are, like myself, Indo-American, could you please summarize and explain what is going on in India? What is this new interest in history from the level of people and from the level of the state? Could you summarize that for us?
So first of all, thanks to SIPEC for giving me an opportunity to interact with the audience here. I think it's a fantastic lineup. I wish I had the time to stay back. I'd request everyone to stay back right until the evening, especially to listen to Mr. Sanyal, who's here. I genuinely don't think I have the kind of vision to summarize what's happening in Bharat, because I've seen this purely from the lens of my personal journey.
Okay.
And I suspect that at the very least, there's a significant cross-section of Bharat's population which relates to my journey. And that explains why there are people who consume what I have to offer. I think what has happened is you could perhaps compare the journey of a middle-class Indian family of the 90s with the journey of Bharat and the trajectory of the journey post-liberalization with Bharat's journey. So when you're trying to make ends meet and you're competing with self-imposed fetters on your ability to innovate and generate wealth, culture typically takes a backseat. And therefore, you're trying to make the most of the opportunities that come your way. English education has typically been seen as the ladder to climb the social ladder, or the means to climb the social ladder. And that largely defines people, at least from my generation and at least two generations thereafter. That, in a sense, is a microcosmic representation of Bharat's journey as well. My own sense is, if Bharat had not adopted the proto-Soviet model, so to speak, and had liberalized the market much before, in addition to, of course, setting up certain public sector units, which was very important for a nascent, fledgling, independent country, this so-called churn or journey that you're witnessing in, let's say, in the 2000s and post that, would have been advanced by a couple of decades. Because you're looking at the fulfillment of Maslow's needs at a larger scale, where once people know that they have the innate ability to generate wealth, which they've always had, they then look out for cultural aspects to reclaim what they believe has been taken from them or has been distorted. So that, I think, is more or less the generation or the journey that we're currently witnessing. And the good part is people are hungry for knowledge about the past.
Right.
There is a very conscious awakening that what most of us have consumed or have been put through our schooling may not represent the reality, and that the education curriculum of this country, of Bharat, has been significantly politically shaped by those who took forward the policy of the colonizer significantly. And therefore, that sense of self-loathing which was drilled into your heads through the education system is being rebelled at by the generation of the 90s, which I represent. So if you look at most people who are vocally rebelling against the system, which we have inherited and have taken for granted, are the ones who have come through the system and therefore have an acute knowledge of what it does to you, and are grateful for the cultural filters which we managed to retain despite the education system and not because of it. And that, I think, is the journey that you currently are seeing. And I don't think it's the end of it. This is merely the beginning. I see this playing itself out for the next 25 years at the very least. There are two very different aspects to it. One is dealing with challenges which are external, and the second is dealing with challenges which are internal, both of which are equally important. Because there's a question which most of us are trying to address. Who are we? What's our identity?
Right.
And if you look at social media debates today or even outside of that, there's a significant conversation where people who believe they come from the same ideological school of thought also have a significant diversity of opinion, perhaps even diametrically opposite opinions on the same subject. So politically, they may be the same. Broadly speaking, in terms of ideological tent, they could be under the same umbrella. But within that, there is so much scope for diversity and severe disagreement that I think it bodes well. Because what that means is that the Overton window has shifted from the left, away from the left significantly. And if I've dropped the L-bomb, so be it.
Yeah.
So it's moved significantly away from the left.
Sure.
And now there is a lot of conversation happening within the non-left, not the right. There's a significant difference. At least I don't subscribe to the concept of a right or a left. So that, I think, is very interesting, which means the rules of the debate, the operating conditions or the boundary conditions within which we operate today are significantly being still determined, defined, and circumscribed by members of the non-left. And that will continue to be the way of the future because we are still trying to figure out the building blocks of the conversation. We are still, according to me, at time T0.
Got it.
So I'm happy to be a part of this exciting generation, and I'm happy to be a part of this fortunate generation because I think we are reaping the benefits of the sacrifices of several generations of people who went unrecognized and whose contribution towards awakening the Indic consciousness went unrequited, so to speak. So I think this is a culmination of their efforts and not solo efforts.
I'm afraid if you keep getting applause forever, I might not get through all my questions, so I'll press on here.
And I hope the audience is under no compulsion.
Right. One thing I wanted to ask. So, I mean, it is interesting how you say that there's this sort of this self-imposed sort of mentality that has lasted for generations. You know, today in India we hear debates about, well, India is a secular democracy. It's a constitutional. We have a liberal order. We have a constitution, a secular constitution. But now you're talking about sort of what the next 25 years will look like. Is as a constitutional country, as a country that was whose constitution is sort of framed to be, a secular country and as a traditional liberal democracy, how do we deal with the sort of rising tide that you're talking about of history in Bharat, in this Indic way of thinking? And a lot of people ask, what role do minorities or people who do not subscribe to that Indic mentality have, not only just in India but also in people who love to think about India who are outside of India, like everyone here? Right.
I think the jury is still out on whether the Constitution was meant to be a secular document in the first place. I haven't seen the evidence for it.
Okay.
I haven't seen the evidence for it.
Okay.
And as someone who practices that area of law as one of my areas of core competence, I have been forced to revisit my own previously held notions as part of the research for the books. And second, I said this as much as part of my submissions before the Supreme Court, before a constitution bench, that why do we start with the assumption that the Constitution of Bharat is a liberal document? What is the basis for it? Is that an aspirational goal or is that an axiomatic truth? In either case, I'd like to challenge it. Because I don't see liberalism as something that I wish to worship. And I don't subscribe to those values at all under any circumstances. And I don't want liberalism to define Bharatiya ethos. Bharatiya ethos will be defined by Bharatiya values, not by something that's been imported from outside. Bearing in mind our historical realities, our exigencies, so to speak, and certain aspects of our history, which have presented us with certain legacy issues which we continue to deal with. I don't know if we're dealing with it, but we hope to. So as far as I'm concerned, I perhaps am at disagreement with the premise of the question. That's one. Second, I don't think Bharat has ever needed a secular constitution to accommodate people of various hues. It's one thing to say that Bharat is a multi-religious society. It's one thing to say that it's a plural society, but it's another thing to take away its own sense of native identity. And I don't believe that Bharat needs to alienate its native identity in order for it to accommodate other identities at all in the first place. That has never been the case. The problem, I think, arises when matter and antimatter choose to coexist. Can they? And question of coexistence should never be answered by one community. That should always be answered by all communities in question who are let's say, stakeholders in the question of coexistence. And there, I think, the simpler way to look at it would be this. There is a civilizational identity which is not just cultural, dare I say, it is religious. There is a religious component to it, and there is no need to run away from it. But that need not present a problem or an existential threat to the survival of religious minorities. Bharat is not the Europe of the First World War and the Second World War. So we don't need to suffer from European guilt under any circumstances. Europe's experience with respect to treatment of its religious minorities has not been Bharat's experience. So we don't need to suffer that foisting and that imposition under any circumstances. In fact, we have a much better track record, historically speaking. When we never had a constitution in the first place, we have accommodated the most persecuted communities from across the world, be it the Parsis or the Jews, right? Where was the Indian constitution when the Jews were accommodated in this country, in Bharat? There was no concept of a constitution in the European sense. Because you have to make room for an account for our civilizational ethos, which is fundamentally pluralistic. So long as you do not pit yourself against the values of Bharat. That is a red line, a line in the sand that every society is entitled to draw. And Bharat, as a sovereign society and culture in the first place, is certainly entitled to draw in light of the multiple waves of invasions it's seen, the waves of colonization it's seen, the waves of settler colonialism it has witnessed. So I don't see a problem at all. You have to realize that 50 kilometers away from Delhi, nobody knows the constitution. So it's not the constitution that's protecting people. In a country that's the size of Bharat, with 1.4 billion population, do you really think people walk around with the constitution? Can I do this? Does the constitution permit me to do this or not?
Right.
I don't think that's how it works.
Right.
You should ask a simpler question. Why is it that in a country of the size and scale of Bharat, which is actually a subcontinent that masquerades as a country, and with the kind of resource deficit it has, why is it still largely peaceful? How many countries can you imagine with the best of first world facilities which can manage the population of Bharat, and even if the size is bigger? I don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
Because you depend on law and order, but Bharat society functions on an internal cultural barometer. Never underestimate that.
Right.
So rule of law is good, but there is a rule of dharma that precedes the rule of law, which has animated Bharat society for generations, for eons. And that, I hope, continues to be the way. Because if you hope to put faith entirely in the legal basket, allow me to say this as a lawyer, it's a self-defeating proposition for a lawyer to make. The justice dispensation system rarely works in most jurisdictions. And it works for people with deep pockets. For everybody else, there's dharma, period.
You know, it's really interesting, this wave that you talk about of interest that's happening, that interest that takes place in Bharat's history and Bharat's culture. Do you see it as something, we talk about how it's happening in India as a consequence of, people are now more economically prosperous, people have this new interest, but seated in front of you are primarily members of the diaspora community. So a lot of people, I would guess, who in that sort of 90s generation that you're talking about, came to the United States in seek of economic opportunity. Do you see that the same vigor of rising interest in that history and that culture? Do you think that it's sort of on the right track? Or do you think that it's going in a non-productive direction?
Perhaps I should say this with members of the generation being present. The vigor is present much more now than before.
Understood.
Okay. I'm not blaming any particular generation because I think each generation has been presented with its own set of challenges.
Right.
Right. So I'm not going to take pot shots at any generation. But the fact is that the generation of the 70s, 80s, and 90s is sitting up and taking notice of Bharat as an exciting story that they now wish to be a part of,
Right.
right? Which I think is welcome. It's fantastic. So I certainly believe that the resurgence in Bharat's past is a product of, it's not a single variable equation. There are multiple factors here: geopolitical, religious, cultural, economic, whatnot. But this is here to stay, and I think it's not going back from here. Now, the second part of your question, which I think is more important, is it going in a productive direction or is it non-generative? If conversations are limited to social media battles, they will never be generative. And the hope has been that people who wish to be at the forefront of it, or at least contribute their might to it, produce content which lasts the test of time and not social media attention span. There being a very clear difference between the two. And which is why when you look at stellar individuals such as Mr. Sanyal, Mr. Sampath, and several people from the US who've contributed in this direction, I'm happy about the fact that more and more people are interested in producing works, the written work. And that is proof of whether you're moving in the right direction or not. So there are two aspects to it, which is the supply side and the demand side. The good part is there is a supply side. And the fact that the supply side has been met with resounding success over the last half a decade is proof of the existence of a demand side. Okay, so the audience is ready. So this takes you to a slightly different meta aspect, which is the presence of a ready audience is the reason for the shift of the Overton window in 2014. The presence of the ready audience is the reason why multiple such options are being thrown up to ensure that this is no more a solo act, that there is a line of succession in place, at least in people's headspaces.
Right.
It's also throwing up people who are contributing to the cultural movement. It's also producing people who are contributing to the tech side in the hope that they contribute to the cultural movement.
Right.
So these conversations are not happening in silos anymore. And there's a reason for it. If a certain platform chooses to deplatform people like me because it believes that I'm dangerous, then we need alternatives.
Right.
And I think those alternatives are work in progress. So we will not be dependent on platforms provided by the West anymore to ventilate our points of view. And that sense of Atmanirbharta or independence is very, very crucial. So I'm very happy to note that innovation is not just happening in the economic space, it's also happening in the techno-cultural space. That's crucial. That's proof of the fact that we are thinking ahead. So I think exciting times are ahead.
Perfect. I want to talk a little bit more about, the diaspora sort of community. Like, there's this rising tide. There's a rising tide of interest in Bharat from that Indic point of view. A lot of the people seated here, especially we're in the Bay Area, so tech, healthcare. These are all fields that people are contributing to here in the U.S. and hopefully by extension to India. But this is an election year, both in the United States, and in India.
There comes the landmine.
Yeah, we're gonna get there at some point. Without asking you what your predictions are, what I would like to ask is sort of.
I'm not the one to shy away from predictions.
I know. So while one thing that's always stood out to me. So I grew up in Texas. So I grew up in a pretty red part of this country, and I grew up in a family who supports a lot of the sort of sociocultural shift that's going on in India. One thing that's always perplexed me is the sort of difference in opinions that people have in the United States context and in the Indian context. Do you see the sort of this new Indic awakening, let's call it, the way people are thinking? Do you see that that change in confidence, that new mindset, as something that's applicable to thought outside of India and in the United States diaspora in particular, but maybe elsewhere? And if so, what bearing does that have for how members of the diaspora contribute to politics or to policy in the countries in which they reside?
So I think around the last elections of the US, I saw quite a bit of heated exchanges happening between the Indian diaspora and members in Bharat, each of them trying to outdo the other on their political acumen and their reading of the situation. People who had barely lived in the US for 6 months had suddenly become political pundits on US political history.
That's honestly longer than some
Right.
people at Stanford, but yeah.
Right. I think they acquired political acumen faster than they could acquire the accent of the US.
Yeah.
So, what it revealed was that Indic thought in the US Indian diaspora is perhaps equally divided between the blue and red states. Which is why one of the things that I decided to do was to recede from that conversation for a very different reason altogether. Because that conversation seemed more like an investment in a political ego as opposed to what matters to me and which is my bottom line in all conversations, civilizational interest. I have very little interest in political outcomes if it does not have a tangible bearing on my civilizational interest. So in that sense, you can call me a single agenda fanatic if you want. I have no problems whatsoever being branded as such. And that has been my approach both in Bharat as well as outside of it. Anybody who advances our interest as a civilization will be seen as a viable option. Now, how that lands on people is for them to ask that question of themselves in terms of how they rank their priorities and what those priorities are. I'm interested in only two things. This is in the specific context of Indian diaspora here, or Bharatiya diaspora in the US. Their safety. Whoever can ensure their safety will take precedence for me. Whoever can ensure that they continue to contribute productively to this country's economy without having to think of possible ghettoization. I will think of those options. Whoever does not have an overt or covert animus towards Bharat, those are my options. Whoever understands that it's best to stay out of Bharat's internal politics, that's my option. These are the boxes that someone needs to check. And whoever fills in these boxes, I'm comfortable with them. I have no other problems. I have no problems with their local political affiliation whatsoever. Because I don't pretend to understand the local realities. And I don't wish to as well at this stage. My skin in the game is limited to the safety of my people, namely the Bharatiya diaspora, period. So as long as their interest is secure and nobody interferes with their ways of life and does not reinforce negative stereotypes that they've inherited from the British master, I will certainly think of those options as viable options. Beyond that, I don't care.
Got it. You know, in the last few years,
I have not sidestepped a landmine. This is my honest answer, because it's easy to get mired in political conversations and forgetting what is truly at stake. And that's increasingly happening both in Bharat and here. That is at least my outsider's reading of the situation. So I'm more interested in understanding what should be our priorities and then focusing on who is best positioned to deliver the goods on those priorities, as opposed to reverse engineering the person and then foisting my priorities on the person.
got it.
Because that way, I think you're trying to force fit your expectations on someone who doesn't fit the bill exactly.
Right.
So it's important for that conversation to happen. My only grouse has been that it's time for the Indian diaspora to actively take part in American public life. The extent to which they have contributed to other aspects of American society is vastly superior and therefore conversely inferior in terms of their contribution to American public life. You've lived here for 3 to 4 generations. It's time you made your presence felt. It's very important. And it's not just a question of a luxury anymore. I think it's becoming an existential imperative. That's my reading of it. So what is it that we are doing to coalesce? What is it that we are doing to put together the resources, both human and capital? And I'm not asking for a flexing of muscle as a show of strength. I'm just asking you to protect yourself in every possible way. Because the situation in this country is changing rapidly. And I suspect it's no more the America that you decided to plant your roots in. Next.
Well, I'm going to step a little bit closer to the landmine here.
Yes, please.
So you said that. So you ended with a very interesting thing. This America is not the America that you stepped in.
Yes.
I'll give you, and I have a couple of examples that might be related to what you're talking about. So we talk about Indians or Indian origin people in American public life, and one way to measure that is legislation that's being introduced, legislation that has to do with Indian origin people.
Right.
So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, in the last few years, there have been state level resolutions in California, as well as in the state of Washington, that have to deal with caste-based discrimination.
Right.
I'll just put that example out there. And I want to take that example and what you just said about, the America that you came to, maybe in the 90s or the 80s, and the America of today. And I wanted to just put those two things out there, and I wanted to let you sort of explain the connection and talk a little bit more about what do you see happening in this country? Why do you say that it might not be the America that you originally came to? What undercurrents are going on?
There's a live audience which I can't ask for a show of hands. How many want me to answer this question bluntly?
That is everyone, so
Good.
we're going to do it.
Okay, good. So with the informed consent of the audience,
Please. Glad we got that on the record.
we will be collectively responsible for the outcome. In 2019, I delivered a lecture in Pasadena. And I told them very specifically that you should anticipate what we call reservations in the private sector in the US through the DEI route. I said this in 2019. I was laughed off.
Wow.
And I said there was a legal proceeding which was underway then. I said it's not coincidence. Somebody is testing waters. And I think a soft underbelly stands exposed. And the caste narrative of Bharat will now be exported to America, is what I specifically said. Whether I stand vindicated or not is the question. But the question is, were people in a position to read all of this? Were they ready to respond to it? My honest, candid, harsh assessment is it was too little, too late. It was 11th hour reaction. Which also means that we were so busy with the STEM side that we did not pay enough attention to the humanities side. And that reflects very poorly on our ability to understand the power of humanities to shape minds and narratives. And I'm being benign about it. I think it's being used for thought control is my blunt answer. So I genuinely believe that it's time that at least now, the Bharatiya diaspora, the operative word being Bharatiya diaspora, takes the issue seriously and encourages the study of humanities. Otherwise, while you contribute tax dollars, your fate will be decided by people who shape policy. It's inevitably by people who control humanities. As simple as that. And I say this as a former engineer turned litigator who understands the power of innovation and the power of policy. Policy usually trumps innovation. So I think this was the first time where there were concerted efforts on the part of the Bharatiya diaspora to voice its serious, let's say, disagreement with the policy. Perhaps the last time was in 2016, the California book crisis. I think that was one of those instances. But between 2016 and 2019, has there been a greater ground movement for people to actively watch out? I'm not sure. I genuinely hope that these resolutions, what is it, SB 403 and something else, awakens them and they don't go back to their default state of slumber, civilizational slumber. Because mischievous actors have firmly planted their feet here. And we should expect more tumultuous times ahead. Two, you cannot hope to address this issue without getting into history whatsoever. A few weeks ago, I published a piece in the Indian Express. The title of the piece, and I'm going to stir the hornet's nest here. The title of the piece was "Caste is a Western Construct, so what?" Indian Express did something very mischievous. They edited the title of the piece and they didn't play it back to me before they published it. The title of the piece was, finally, when it was published, "Caste is a Western Construct." So to anyone who reads the piece and focuses exclusively on the title, it seems I'm blaming the colonizer entirely for our caste structure. Whereas if you had actually bothered to read the piece, any lawyer would tell you never judge a contract or a document by the name of the document. You look at the content first. Whatever it is, whether it's a license or an assignment or a transfer or a mortgage or a hypothecation, depends on what the document says, not what it claims to say. Okay? I specifically said, just as dharma is not religion, caste is not varna and jati. I, in fact, went to the extent of saying that the hereditary nature of varna and jati need not be denied. But you need to go a bit beyond that to ask yourself, why have these fault lines emerged significantly in public discourse post 1857? And that year is crucial because that is the year that the crown decides to take over Bharat from the company. Okay? So you will have to deal with a bit of history, and you will have to make sure that history is applied to the present and it doesn't become an archival study, because you don't have the luxury of an archival study anymore. This is a real battleground. This can't happen with part-timers stepping into humanities. It's a battleground of its own. It needs its own set of qualifications. It needs people who are willing to understand the optics of it, who are willing to understand what to say and what not to say, because there's a huge landmine of politically correct filters in this area. Not that I care for it, I'm just saying. So that requires people to take this up full time. Now, the welcome change, and which I think Bharat has initiated, is that people from the STEM side have transitioned into humanities and they've decided to apply their analytical skills to the STEM side, to the humanities side. And that, I think, is crucial, because the tendency of a person coming from the STEM side is to use evidence as much as possible to back their position and not fall prey to confirmation bias, where you decide a position and accordingly reverse engineer the evidence to support that position. Okay, so that, I think, has to start. But nevertheless, the bottom line and the larger picture, or perhaps the call to action that I'm making here, is kindly do not ignore humanities. If you choose to relegate it entirely to the margins, rest assured you will be pushed to the margins in a while. So please take it seriously is all I have to say.
As we wrap up here, because I do want to leave time for at least a couple of, or at least one or two questions. You just said, great piece of advice, sort of be more in tune with the humanities. And Stanford is a very interesting school because, well, it was founded and its sort of time of rise was really through science and engineering. It's been very privileged to sort of bolster its humanities and social sciences heavily over the last couple of decades. So we have a lot of great people there too. But because we're a student group and our focus is Stanford students, and how do we get them sort of more involved in India's growth story and all the dimensions that you laid out? My final question, I guess, would be, what advice do you have to them, to the students that are sitting here, to the students that are watching online, not just at Stanford, but all over? What should we be doing? How should we be thinking about India's growth and from a civilizational narrative?
I have no doubts in my head that India's material success is destined. I'm more interested in its ability to retain its identity while this happens. And the challenge here is slightly more psychological, which is how do we get Indians to look at Bharat from an insider's perspective and not an outsider's perspective? And that perhaps is a greater problem with people living here, not because there's a peculiar manufacturing defect, but because of the conditioning, because of the conditions you live in, and because of the system that you're exposed to, and also the fact that you don't live there. So one of the things that I've tried to address through whatever little I've been able to put out in the public domain is how do we get Bharatiyas to not see their culture through the prism of a tourist,
Right.
who's looking for cultural relics, but who has to look for living traditions and living societies. Understand them from their perspective, not to necessarily defend everything, but also not to start with the premise they need reform.
Right.
They need to be civilized. I think that the shelf life for that kind of an approach is way past. I mean, I think we are way past that.
Right.
So that, I think, is the trick. And that's not going to happen unless and until you actually are in active touch with your roots. Everything else follows from that. Allow me to say this, the so-called challenge is not cultural. It is not political. It is not economic. And it is certainly not, civilizational is too soft a word. It is actually ontological. It is epistemology. And finally, it's child theology. These are areas where we need to invite more and more people into the conversation. So the first step is for you to understand your own culture better.
Right.
And the second step is for you to present it to the outsider as well as the insider better. If you don't do it, I suspect even well-meaning Bharatiyas who live here will buy into the narrative that was peddled by certain publications from the East Coast and the West Coast. Okay? New York Times.
East Coast. Yeah.
I dropped it.
Right.
So I think it's very important that you have what it takes to defend your position. The problem in school, on school campuses and college campuses, is that Bharatiya students don't know what to do when they are faced with a volley of stereotypical allegations about their culture. They have no ammunition to defend themselves. Which is why the better part of my outreach has been with the student community in Bharat. And I hope to engage more with the student community here. I'm going to your slightly more mischievous campus here.
I know. Yes. Yes.
That's tomorrow.
Hopefully, we had a much better welcome for you than they will.
I expect a very different kind of welcome.
Well, you'll have a different welcome there. Yes.
I'm going prepared for it fully.
Right.
So the point is, this starts with, there is no shortcuts to this. There's no, 5-minute jujitsu here. There's a lot of hard work that needs to be invested in acquiring a clear sense of your own history, because it is your history that's being stereotyped and weaponized against you. Every aspect of your history, from your marriage rituals to whatnot, caste, of course, has been the traditional whipping boy. So I think, okay, whipping person, not boy. Okay. So you need to be able to understand it better. So knowledge production with respect to Bharatiya history is step one. And how do you then make it consumable for different layers and categories and shades and grades of audience? That is the next step. So student population, maybe you could take an active interest, and your clubs should have a pulse on Bharat's cultural discourse. Don't limit yourself to the political discourse. That's all I have to say.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have time for one question. So can I please get your hands up? Okay. This, hopefully 90% of the room doesn't
That's
hate
one
me.
too many.
Doesn't hate me after this.
Start with a lady.
We'll go right here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Namaskaram, Sai Deepak. Thank you so much for your speech and all the points you brought up. My question is, you mentioned epistemological challenges and how the current fight we're in is sort of a bigger ontological challenge. I'm wondering if you see the way we talk about development itself in India, when we talk about STEM and we talk about
Correct.
our technical expertise, would you say that we need a different way to even
Yes.
measure how the civilizational narrative can be pushed? And if so, how do you see that? Do you see that changing? And how would you push for such a change in the way we are talked about on the global stage, even when it comes to positive things?
I think it's a fantastic question that needed to be asked. My core area of practice as a professional litigator is intellectual property law. So when I say that development metrics and definitions have to be changed, people usually accuse me of hypocrisy. Whereas I say that precisely because I practice intellectual property law and I understand how development as a discourse has taken shape in other parts of the world, I'm also aware of the mistakes they've made. So what has happened is, whether it comes to culture or economics, the traditional path in Bharat for the better part of its independent existence has been to follow the trial and error of the West without applying its own original mind to it. Can we subscribe to the very same model, which is perhaps great for a population of 300 million and which is 3 times the size of Bharat? Would that work for a country that's 1/3 the size of US and 3 times the population at the very least? When I say this, I'm typically accused of being a Luddite, someone who's anti-development and anti-innovation and anti-technology. I'm neither. I'm none. I am just clear that you need to find a way to genuinely uplift people's standard of living and quality of living, but equally be conscious of the acute resource deficit across the board. I know this is a very sensitive topic here. I certainly believe that climate change is a real issue. And I believe that I would be slotted as someone who comes from the conservative side of Bharat's ideological spectrum. And therefore, my belief in the existence of climate change is at loggerheads with the definition of a conservative here. So that's how the definitions change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, territory to territory. More importantly, as an active and a proud Sanatani who believes in the value of dharma, I've said this before. Kalidasa's Raghuvamsam starts with a particular shloka, which is effectively a prayer to Shiva and Parvati as the parents of the universe. And they're typically seen as Purusha and Prakriti. So the existence of dharma without Prakriti is impossible. There is no concept of dharma or righteousness without nature or respect for nature. Precisely why I've said this in the dense, unreadable book that I've written. That if civilizationalism is used as a political tokenage merely to beat the other side in an argument, and it is reduced to a brownie point, then you will never apply it as an active filter and an active test when it comes to development or defining development. And for dharma to be a real benchmark or a yardstick or a guiding light for our policy shaping, it needs to equally feature in our developmental discourse. So I completely agree with you that I genuinely hope that just as Bharat has shown both vertebracy and originality and independence in retaining its independence on the geopolitical front and on the international front, it does not allow the West to repeat its mistakes in the name of harmonizing laws across the world and in the name of access to markets. Because they are interested in your markets, but we have a long-term sustainable interest to cater to, which is our own existence. So I hope, to borrow an adage from the colonial master, we don't act penny wise and pound foolish. Next.
That's all we have time for, folks. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And before we have you go, we are going to give you something that you can wear to your visit tomorrow to our favorite campus. So there you go. So we'll have one photo taken. Thank you. It does not. You can write it on. We can do that for you. There you go. And we'll get one photo here, please. There you go. All right. All right, perfect. Let's get one more round of applause, please, for Mr. Sai Deepak. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you.